Okay, so I really like the conference theme, less is more. And in thinking about the theme, it can be interpreted in lots of different ways, of course. But it seemed to me that as technology teachers, we struggle to get less. It always seems that there's more and more things coming our way, more and more things we have to consider, that we have to incorporate into our teaching. So I was wondering whether sorry, I'm just organizing my screens here. I was wondering whether when we think about our role as technology educators, we're involved in STEM, we're also involved in making, is this too much for us? So that's the idea I want to pursue today. So if we look at the demands that are placed on technology teachers, there's many of them. We have to prepare students for really what is an unknown future. We have to teach a very broad technology curriculum. We're expected to nurture all the students in our classes. Some of us, we have to integrate vocational issues into our teaching. We also have to manage our workshops. In the introductory video, we saw lots of workshop pictures. We're the ones who have to manage those. We have to satisfy parental expectations, and we have to assess students in ways that we know from research aren't very important. So there's a lot of things for us to consider. And on top of all that, we have the STEM movement and the maker movement. So my question and thoughts today are related to how can we do that? Is it possible for us to be true to technology education, but at the same time teach into STEM and also support the maker movement? So let's look at the essence of each of those contexts. So first of all, if we look at what's involved in technology education, even though it's a little different in many different countries, I think there's a number of elements that are similar in all countries. So often it's technology literacy that is our goal. In many countries, we have a compulsory curriculum. We have practical project outcomes with our students. We have to look at both manipulative and the development of cognitive skills at the same time. We have a design process focus in what we do. Our teaching is student-centered. We have to deal with relevant technology areas and involve authentic activities. So to my mind, that's the essence of technology education. So let's look at STEM education now. And again, this is interpreted in different countries in different ways. But I think generally it involves the integration of disciplines. The content for STEM is discipline derived. So the content comes from the disciplines that are integrated. We often talk about the notion of STEM literacy, which I think is a bit problematic because it's not really very well defined, and no one really knows what STEM literacy is. Our focus is also on the development of soft skills. We are problem issue oriented in STEM, and we are caught serving multiple concurrent goals. So in STEM, we are confronted with the need to be relevant to everybody. So there's an aspect of general education, but also concurrently, STEM has a strong vocational goal because we're wanting more scientists and engineers, but also we have that disciplinary focus from the disciplines that are involved in STEM. So it's a very complex kind of situation.
And John, excuse me, this is Ed. What slide are you on? Because it's not moving. It's stuck on slide number 2.
Sorry, I'm on slide number 6. Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, maybe if you go full screen and see if it'll work, or use a little screen share at the bottom there, because you're stuck on slide 2. That's all we can see.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep. Down at the bottom there, next to the slider, maybe if you go full screen, you'll be able to advance. But we're only seeing slide number 2. Is that correct?
Hey, John, try using your arrow keys as well instead of the mouse.
Yeah, I was using my arrow keys, but I think I've got my screens mixed up here.
There you are.
Yeah, try the full screen.
So can you see the full screen now?
Yeah, we can see slide number 4.
Okay, so it's moving now.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. I won't fiddle with it anymore. I'll just work on that. So is it large enough?
Yes, much better.
Okay. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so that's the slide I was just speaking to. And now I want to just briefly look at what the essence of maker education is, the maker movement. It's essentially practical, so the name making indicates that. It can be community or school-based. In Australia, the maker movement is more of a community movement than it is a school movement. There's really no curriculum, so that's a difference with those other areas. It's very strongly student and user-centered. It's quite unstructured. The outcomes are generally individualized, and certainly engagement of people in the maker movement is the focus. So considering all those elements, we can notice some significant differences. And from the perspective of technology educators looking at STEM and making, I think it's interesting to look at the differences between those areas. So let me work through each of those differences, and I'll go quite quickly. So if we look at curriculum, first of all, there is a technology education curriculum. Generally, there's no STEM curriculum, although STEM curriculum are developing in some countries, and certainly for the maker movement, there's no curriculum. So if we look at the goals of each of those areas, again, we notice some differences. So the goal of technology education is technological literacy. One of the goals of STEM education, I know there are other goals, but one of the goals is the development of soft skills. within students to help them be creative and collaborative. And then I think the main goal of the maker movement is creativity. So the goals are different. The approach to students is also different. We say that technology education is important for everybody. All students should do technology. We sometimes say that STEM is important for all students, but in many schools, it's only available for some students. And then making is also just for some students. Let's look at whether it has a vocational or a general bias in its goal. So technology education is certainly a component of general education. We say it's important for everybody. STEM has a vocational goal. STEM began with the goal of making more students interested in science and engineering. And really the maker movement doesn't propose either. It's kind of in the middle. The world focus, the big view for each of these areas. Technology education looks at the made world. STEM education looks at both the made and the natural world and that intersection. And the maker movement has a focus on the made world. So that's another difference. The type of knowledge that's important in each of these areas. In technology education, the knowledge that is important for students is dependent on the problem that they're dealing with or the design that they're working on. For STEM, the knowledge is predetermined because STEM knowledge develops from the disciplines and that knowledge is predetermined. In making, the knowledge that's important and useful is very dependent on what's being made. So the source of the knowledge for these areas is also different. If we look at assessment, we do assess technology education. Generally, we don't assess STEM activities, even though some assessment is beginning to be developed. And for making, the outcomes are not usually assessed. If we look at the process versus the outcome, where the focus of these areas is, technology education has a focus on the process. What's important is what the students do. STEM is similar in that way. The focus is on student development of solutions to problems. But in making, it's the outcome that's important. What you end up with, what you make, that is what's important. So there are a number of differences, and I think as technology educators, it's important for us to be aware of those differences as we try and reconcile them. There are, of course, a number of similarities as well. And let me quickly go through these 4 areas that I think bring these 3 areas together. So if we look at creativity, technology education often structures activities into the curriculum to ensure that students become creative. Similarly, in STEM, often the notion of creativity is integrated within the STEM activities. And in the maker movement, well, creativity may develop or it may not. So it's kind of there's a kind of a freedom related to that. The focus on process I think, is a similarity across all of these areas. So for technology education, we have the technology process, the engineering process, the design process. These are common foci on the process of technology education. In STEM, we have things like an inquiry approach or a project or a problem-based approach. These are also focuses on the process. And again, in making, it's kind of a freer environment. So there's not really as much focus on the process, but certainly it's still important. They are all involved in active learning. So many areas of the curriculum don't have the advantage that we have because practicality is one of the essences of our curriculum area. So in technology education, it's practical because we're solving problems. In STEM, it's practical because we have to get student engagement. And in making, it's essentially active because we're involved in making things. So the notion of active learning is a commonality across these three areas. They're all also strive for authenticity. So in technology education, we provide a technological context for our students, and we try and ensure that that context is authentic for the level of the students that we're dealing with. In STEM, we try and make what the students do real for them. We want real world, authentic projects. And in making, often what the students do is self-selected. They choose what they're going to make. So it's inevitably authentic in that case. So my thesis is that despite there being more differences than similarities in these three areas, if technology education is the vehicle for us, and I'm assuming here I'm talking to an audience of technology educators, so that's our vehicle, that's our main focus, then I think the demands of STEM and making on top of that are manageable because the similarities in those areas outweigh the differences. So another way of looking at this is looking at a diagram of the intersection of these elements. So in this discussion, I'm not interested in these areas. So STEM by itself or making by itself or the intersection of those areas together. What I am interested in from a technology education perspective is technology education and the intersection of all those three areas. Because as technology educators, that's what we have to deal with. So in terms of just those two elements of this Venn diagram, the intersection is composed essentially of these elements. So the soft skills, both manipulative skills and cognitive skills. There's a process focus, as I indicated earlier. The learning that takes place in the intersection of all those three elements is active. The activities students do are relevant and authentic to them. What's done is is student-centered, so it's not teacher-centered or curriculum-centered, it's student-centered, and it's integrated. So from a technology education perspective, as technology educators, this is what we have to deal with. So on top of those areas in the intersection, we have the technology curriculum, which is a component of general education. So we say technology is important for all students, and our goal is technological literacy. So from a technology education perspective, my thesis this morning is that dealing with the technology curriculum, which is a component of general education and has a goal of technological literacy, plus the elements of STEM and making that occur in that intersection, is manageable for us as technology educators. So even though, in a sense, it's not less is more, in a sense, it's more is more. So we're being confronted with more pressures from STEM, from making, from our own curriculum. Despite that, my thesis, because of these intersections, is that as technology educators, this is a manageable scenario for us. I actually think there's advantages for us as technology educators in being involved in that integrated space. We can use it to enhance the profile of technology education. We can use it to maintain our discipline. Some countries' technology education is under threat. So I think involvement in making and involvement in STEM can help us actually maintain the relevance of our discipline. We can use it to inform others about what technology education is. We can use it to promote interdisciplinarity. That's always been an important part of technology education. We can use it to develop collegiality amongst our colleagues, our science and our maths colleagues. And we can use it to reinforce the fundamentals of technology education. So I think from a technology education perspective, being involved in STEM and being involved in making is not only possible within our profession, but we can actually use that involvement to the advantage of technology education. Therefore, down the bottom of this slide, my conclusion is that more is okay. So if I go back to the original slide that we started from, which was asking the question, is technology education and STEM and making, is that too much? I think it's not. I think it's possible. And for those of us who are at our core technology educators, it's not only possible, but it's advantageous. So that's my thesis this morning, that there are advantages for technology educators to be involved in STEM and also to be involved in making. Just before we have some questions and comments, Mark, I just want to remind people, as you suggested I could do, of the next conference. On the ICTE current website, there's more information about the conference, but While everyone's here, I just want to take this opportunity that the next conference will be in December in 2022, and it'll be in the Gold Coast campus of Southern Cross University on the Gold Coast in Queensland. So we'll hear more about that over time, but I just wanted to put that thought in your mind before we conclude this presentation. So thank you for letting me do that, Mark.